She hadn't let anyone touch her in years, until I accidentally brushed her hand, and everything changed. The afternoon sun filtered softly through the cafe windows, casting a warm golden glow across the tables. I had settled into my usual corner, laptop open, pretending to focus on my writing, though my attention kept drifting to the people around me. That's when I noticed her, a woman in her early 40s, seated alone, absorbed in a thick, well-worn book. There was a calm elegance to the way she held herself, a quiet composure that somehow drew my gaze without her knowing. Her hair fell in loose waves around her shoulders, the sunlight catching on strands that looked almost like molten bronze. She was casually dressed, yet every movement carried an unspoken grace. There was something familiar in the way she flipped the pages, the small sigh she let out occasionally, as though the book was both an escape and a companion. I couldn't tell if it was curiosity or an inexplicable pull, but I found myself watching. And then it happened. My elbow knocked against the sugar container as I reached for it, sending it teetering toward her table. Reflexively, she reached out, steadying it, and our hands brushed for the briefest of moments. It was such a fleeting touch, but it sent a strange warmth coursing through me, a subtle recognition that lingered longer than it should have. She looked up, startled slightly, and our eyes met. "Sorry about that," I murmured, my voice quieter than I intended. "No harm done," she replied, her voice soft, measured, with a faint trace of amusement. There was a kindness there, but also a hint of something else, something that made me wonder what stories were hidden behind her calm exterior. We exchanged a few sentences, the kind of light, polite conversation that could have ended in a blink. But it didn't. There was a rhythm to it, a pause between words that spoke more than the sentences themselves. I noticed the subtle tension in her fingers as she adjusted her book, the almost imperceptible way her shoulders relaxed when I laughed at a casual joke. Every movement was layered with quiet observation, and I found myself studying it carefully, not wanting to miss a single detail. She smiled again, the kind of smile that seemed to linger in the air, leaving a soft trace even after her lips parted. It was graceful, understated, yet it carried a depth that suggested both strength and vulnerability. My chest tightened slightly as I realized how unusual it was for me to notice so many small things about someone I had just met. As I returned to my seat, our hands brushed again, this time unintentionally, as she shifted her book, and I caught myself holding onto the fleeting warmth a moment longer than necessary. I wondered if she felt it too, that quiet, electric awareness that sometimes blooms in the most ordinary of places. And as I sipped my coffee, I found my thoughts circling back to her, to the soft elegance of her presence, to the way something as simple as a touch could feel strangely intimate after so long. It was a small moment, almost nothing in the grand scheme of life, yet it lingered. Something had sparked, an unspoken curiosity, a gentle tension that promised more if one dared to reach for it. And I, for one, was curious enough to want to find out what came next. I didn't expect to see her again so soon. Yet there she was, standing in the bookstore aisle I had wandered into that late afternoon, flipping through a section of novels I barely paid attention to. The coincidence should have felt ordinary, but my heart thumped with a quiet excitement. She looked up, caught my gaze, and for a moment, her expression held that same polite, curious smile I remembered from the cafe. "Fancy meeting you here," I said, attempting casualness that my racing heartbeat betrayed. She tilted her head slightly, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I could say the same," she replied, her voice calm yet carrying that subtle undertone of amusement. There was a comfort in her presence, even in this brief, unplanned meeting, and I noticed how the bookstore's muted lighting seemed to highlight the warm tones of her hair and the soft elegance of her posture. We started walking together toward the exit, talking about books we liked, movies that lingered in memory, and the quiet pleasures of ordinary days. Her laugh was soft but melodic, carrying a warmth that made the space between us feel smaller, somehow cozier. As we walked side by side, our arms brushed occasionally, light, accidental touches, but each one felt like a small current passing through me, a reminder of that first spark in the cafe. At one point, she paused to let me navigate through a narrow aisle. Without thinking, I instinctively reached to guide her along, my hand hovering near the small of her back. She flinched slightly at first, then relaxed, a subtle trust settling in her body language. That brief, nearly imperceptible contact left a warmth I couldn't shake, and I noticed her glance lingering on my hand a fraction longer than necessary. We stepped outside into the soft glow of the late afternoon, the streets lined with rustling trees and the faint scent of coffee drifting from a nearby cafe. A gentle breeze tugged at her jacket, lifting a strand of her hair across her face. I reached out, brushing it behind her ear without thinking. Our eyes met again, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of us. The warmth of her skin, the subtle softness of her hair under my fingers, it was intimate yet safe, and it made my chest tighten with an awareness I hadn't expected. Walking alongside her, I noticed her subtle reactions, the slight leaning in, the pause before she answered, the way her fingers brushed against mine when adjusting her bag strap. Each small gesture built an unspoken rhythm between us, a language that needed no words. She was guarded, yes, but the edges of her reserve were softening in the quiet ease of our shared moments. By the time we parted at the street corner, I realized I was reluctant to let her go. She offered a gentle smile, the kind that lingered in the air long after she turned away. And as I watched her walk down the street, I felt a quiet thrill at the thought that this wasn't the last time our paths would cross. Something subtle, something unspoken, was growing between us, a cautious curiosity, a hesitant comfort, a pull that neither of us had fully named yet. Even in that ordinary, accidental meeting, there was magic. And I was beginning to understand that some connections didn't need grand gestures, they needed small, deliberate moments that lingered, that left traces long after the moment had passed. It was a rainy afternoon when we found ourselves in the corner of the same cafe, the soft patter of raindrops against the windows creating a cocoon around us. Outside, the world blurred into streaks of gray, but inside, the warm aroma of coffee and the faint hum of quiet conversation made it feel like time had slowed. She sat across from me, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, fingers tracing the rim absently. There was something fragile in her posture today, a subtle weight behind her eyes that caught me off guard. We had been talking for a while, light conversation about books, music, and small, ordinary joys. Then, almost without realizing it, the tone shifted. She spoke hesitantly, her voice quieter, almost swallowed by the cafe's gentle murmur. "It's hard," she said, eyes flicking down to the table. "After my divorce, it's strange, trying to feel normal again. Strange letting someone in, letting someone touch me, even casually." Her words hung in the air, delicate yet heavy, and I found myself leaning in instinctively, not wanting to crowd her, just wanting her to know she wasn't alone. I placed my hand lightly over hers, a gesture of simple, human connection. The warmth of her skin against mine was surprising, intimate in a way that neither of us spoke aloud. For a moment, she didn't pull away, instead, her fingers lingered, almost imperceptibly curling around the edge of my hand. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I simply said, softly, "You don't have to feel pressured. Take your time. I'm here." There was an honesty in my voice, a quiet steadiness that I hoped would reassure her. She looked up then, and her eyes met mine, a mixture of vulnerability and something almost like relief. Her lips parted in a small, almost shy smile, the kind that seemed to release some of the tension she had been holding. We talked then, more openly than before. She shared stories of the years after her marriage, the isolation, the unexpected freedom, and the subtle loneliness that came with it. I listened, fully present, noticing every flicker of emotion in her expressions, every pause, every slight tremor in her hands as she recounted memories. And with every word, the distance between us lessened. There was no rush, no expectation, just a shared space where honesty felt safe. At one point, I reached across the table and brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. It was a simple gesture, but her eyes softened, and a quiet trust seemed to settle between us. The gentle contact, skin against skin, a heartbeat shared across a table, was charged with intimacy, yet entirely safe. It was the kind of touch that said, "I see you, I understand, and I'm here." By the time we left the cafe, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the world outside felt sharper, more vibrant. But I carried with me a deeper sense of connection than words could capture, a fragile trust, a mutual recognition that we were both allowing ourselves to be seen in ways we hadn't for years. She had opened a door, tentatively, and I felt honored to step inside, even if just a little. That afternoon, I realized the slowest gestures, the brush of fingers, the steady presence, the patient listening, could speak louder than any declaration. And as we parted with a soft, lingering glance, I knew this was the beginning of something delicate and profound, a connection built on vulnerability, trust, and the quiet courage it takes to let someone in again. The evening was soft, almost suspended in time, as we walked along the tree-lined streets near the park. The air carried a faint chill, softened by the golden glow of streetlights, and the rustle of leaves under our feet added a gentle rhythm to our steps. Conversation flowed easily, lighter now, sprinkled with laughter at small, shared observations. Yet beneath the ease, there was a quiet electricity, a subtle awareness of each other that neither of us named aloud. She walked slightly ahead of me, and instinctively, I reached out, my hand hovering near the small of her back to guide her around a patch of wet leaves. She flinched for a moment, just barely, then relaxed, as if acknowledging without saying that it was okay to let me be near. That small act of contact, so brief, so simple, lingered in my awareness long after it happened. The warmth of her body close to mine, the gentle sway of her movement, it all spoke louder than words. At one point, she stopped to laugh softly at a story I had told, and I turned slightly toward her. Our shoulders brushed, and the subtle pressure of that fleeting contact made my chest tighten in a way that was both exciting and unnerving. She didn't pull away immediately, and I noticed the way her eyes met mine, hesitant, curious, searching. There was a tension there, unspoken yet palpable, and I felt it mirrored in my own chest. A breeze lifted her hair across her face, and I reached out instinctively, tucking it gently behind her ear. Our eyes locked for a moment, and I could see the faint blush that had colored her cheeks. The brush of her hair against my fingers, the warmth of her proximity, the quiet night around us, it felt intimate in a way that didn't demand words. Just being close, feeling her near, was enough to stir a quiet longing that neither of us acted upon. We walked in near silence for a few moments, side by side, and I noticed the little things, the soft rhythm of her breathing, the way her hand brushed mine when she adjusted the strap of her bag, the subtle leaning toward me when she spoke. Each gesture was small, fleeting, yet carried a weight that made the space between us feel charged. There was a tension, yes, but also a profound sense of trust, an unspoken understanding that closeness didn't have to rush into anything it wasn't ready for. When we finally reached the small park gate, she paused and looked up at me, her eyes reflecting the streetlight glow. I could feel my heartbeat echoing in my chest, a quiet thrill of anticipation and admiration. The night, the soft rustle of leaves, the faint scent of rain lingering in the air, all made the moment feel suspended, almost sacred. We shared a look that said more than words ever could, an acknowledgement of attraction, of desire restrained yet alive, of a growing intimacy that neither of us wanted to break. As we parted that night, I walked away with a new awareness, a delicate excitement that wasn't about rushing but savoring. The subtle touches, the lingering glances, the quiet trust we shared, they were the language of a connection that was deepening in the most human, tender way. And I knew, with a quiet certainty, that this slow, careful unfolding was only the beginning. It was a quiet evening when I found myself invited to her apartment, the city outside dimming under a soft, golden haze of streetlights. The air inside smelled faintly of jasmine and warm vanilla, comforting and familiar, as though it had been waiting for this moment. We sat across from each other on the couch, a low table between us holding mugs of tea that steamed gently, filling the space with warmth. There was a stillness in the room that neither of us wanted to break with small talk. We began talking, as we always did, but the topic slowly drifted toward life's complexities, love, regrets, and the unusual quiet of days spent alone. She leaned back, shoulders slightly tense, and I noticed how the vulnerability in her posture mirrored a hesitation I had been feeling myself. Our conversation paused naturally, and in that silence, she finally spoke. "It feels strange," she said softly, her eyes fixed on her tea. "Strange letting someone touch me again. I mean, after all that's happened, after the years of being cautious, it's almost frightening how natural it feels to just be close to someone." Her words hung in the room, delicate yet weighted, and I felt the careful patience she had built over years of guarding herself. I reached out slowly, placing my hand over hers, not pressing, just resting gently, letting the warmth of my palm speak what words could not. She looked up, startled at first, then softened, letting her fingers curl lightly around mine. The contact was simple, fleeting, yet charged with a tenderness that neither of us tried to analyze. "I understand," I said softly, keeping my voice low, even, steady. "You don't have to rush anything. You don't have to pretend. I want you to feel safe." There was no urge to fill the space with declarations or grand gestures. Silence, paired with that small touch, was enough to convey the sincerity I felt. Her eyes met mine, wide and shimmering, as if she was weighing whether to retreat or to trust. Slowly, she shifted closer, letting her head rest tentatively against my chest. The rhythm of her heartbeat pressed softly against me, steady yet fragile, a subtle reminder of her vulnerability. I draped an arm lightly around her shoulders, careful, gentle, as if shielding her from a world that had been unkind before. In that quiet, suspended moment, laughter and conversation from outside seemed distant, irrelevant. All that existed was this delicate, fragile trust between us, an unspoken acknowledgement that the slow, careful journey we had taken had brought us to a place neither of us fully expected. She exhaled softly, a small shiver running through her, and I felt the weight of years of caution and fear melt, if only slightly, into the warmth of our shared presence. It was not a moment of passion, not a rush into romance, but it was infinitely intimate. A mutual recognition of desire restrained by respect, of vulnerability met with care, of trust quietly earned. And as she rested there, the faint scent of her hair brushing against my chest, I realized that this patient, gentle connection, was the most profound beginning of all. The weekend sunlight streamed through the tall windows of her apartment, casting warm, honey-toned patches on the hardwood floor. The air smelled faintly of fresh herbs and baked bread, a domestic comfort that made the space feel alive and inviting. I had come over to help her prepare lunch, though the truth was, I hadn't been invited for the cooking. It was the quiet pleasure of simply being near her that drew me. We moved around the kitchen with an easy rhythm, almost wordless at times. She chopped vegetables with careful precision while I stirred sauces and measured ingredients, yet there was a playful energy between us. Occasionally, our hands brushed as I reached for a bowl or guided a knife, and each contact sparked a quiet, warming awareness. She laughed softly at my clumsy attempt to balance a stack of plates, and her eyes crinkled at the corners in a way that made my chest tighten with affection. At one point, she leaned slightly over to read the recipe, and I instinctively draped an arm lightly across her shoulders. She froze for a heartbeat, then relaxed into the touch, letting her head rest just above mine. The warmth of her body, the soft brush of her hair against my arm, and the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the aroma of the food created a sensory tapestry that made the world outside fade into quiet irrelevance. We paused for a moment, standing close amid the clatter of dishes and the hiss of a boiling pot, just enjoying the simple pleasure of proximity. She tilted her head toward me, her lips parting slightly, as if considering whether to speak or remain in the quiet intimacy. I noticed the subtle rise and fall of her chest, the way her fingers flexed as they rested lightly against mine when she adjusted a utensil. Every small gesture, every micro-expression, carried a weight that went far beyond ordinary domesticity. Then came laughter, shared over an accidental sprinkle of flour on her cheek. I reached out instinctively, brushing it away with the pad of my finger. Her cheeks warmed at the touch, and she looked at me with eyes that held something unspoken, a blend of amusement, affection, and trust. The moment was delicate, almost sacred, and yet completely ordinary, the kind of intimacy that grows naturally from shared life rather than dramatic declarations. As we sat down to eat, our conversation drifted seamlessly from light banter to more personal topics, childhood memories, small regrets, fleeting ambitions. We shared silence too, comfortable in each other's presence, feeling the subtle tension of trust and growing affection. There was no need to fill the air with words, just being near her, feeling her steady warmth beside me, was enough. By the time I left that afternoon, I carried with me the quiet satisfaction of progress. The slow, careful unfolding of our connection had created something solid beneath the excitement, the kind of trust that felt rare and precious. And I knew that the small, tender gestures, the brush of a hand, the shared laughter, the warmth of proximity, were the foundation for something deeper. Something patient. Something lasting. We were no longer merely acquaintances sharing fleeting moments. We were two people learning how to be together, how to trust again, and how to let warmth, affection, and subtle desire grow in its own time. And that realization, quiet as it was, left my heart both full and steady. The park was quiet that evening, bathed in the soft glow of a setting sun. Golden light spilled across the pond, reflecting in gentle ripples, and the air carried the faint scent of earth and fallen leaves. We walked slowly along the path, our steps in sync but neither rushing. There was a calmness in the moment, a delicate balance between anticipation and the comfort of having arrived together after months of cautious connection. We found a bench near the water's edge and sat close, almost instinctively, sharing the small, comforting warmth of proximity. Our shoulders touched lightly, and I could feel the subtle press of her arm against mine, a gesture both natural and intimate. The silence between us was not empty, it was full of unspoken acknowledgement, of everything we had shared and carefully built. The faint chirp of crickets and the distant rustle of trees became a background symphony to our quiet togetherness. I reached for her hand slowly, giving her time to react, but she offered it willingly, fingers intertwining with mine. The simple act felt monumental, a culmination of months of gentle trust, shy curiosity, and tentative affection. Her skin was warm and soft against mine, and I felt the steady pulse of her heartbeat as though it were a subtle drum echoing the rhythm of the emotions between us. She turned her head slightly, and her hair brushed against my cheek, the scent of jasmine lingering faintly in the evening air. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" I asked softly, not wanting to break the spell of the moment. She let out a small, contented sigh, leaning closer. "All the time," she said. "It feels safe, being here with you. Like I can finally breathe." Her voice trembled slightly, a whisper of vulnerability that made my chest tighten with care. I brushed a gentle hand over her hair, letting my fingers linger at the nape of her neck, a simple gesture that carried a world of affection. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, and I kissed her cheek softly, deliberately, slow, warm, and full of tenderness. She rested her head against my shoulder, a quiet sigh of acceptance and comfort escaping her. There was no need for words, the connection we had built spoke volumes. Every hesitation, every laugh, every touch from the past months had led us to this natural closeness. We sat together for a long while, hands clasped, sharing the serenity of the moment. Occasionally, our fingers brushed in small, accidental touches, yet each one felt like a promise of patience and understanding. The world outside could wait. Here, in the golden glow of the park, we had created a space of trust, affection, and quietly simmering love, a place where neither past fears nor societal expectations could intrude. As the first stars began to appear in the twilight sky, I realized something profound: love, when built slowly, carefully, and respectfully, becomes more than desire, it becomes grounding, comforting, and enduring. She shifted slightly, resting her cheek against my shoulder again, and I felt the soft warmth of her breath against my chest. In that shared silence, I knew we had arrived at something real. Something lasting. And as we finally rose to leave, hands still intertwined, the world seemed a little softer, a little warmer. Together, we had found not just affection, but a deep, mutual understanding, a romance not hurried or forced, but earned through patience, trust, and the quiet courage to open our hearts. If this slow burn story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you won't miss the next emotional journey. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced a connection that started with the smallest touch? I'd love to hear your story.